For decades, the relationship between Alberta and the federal government has been marked by recurring tensions: taxation, energy, environment. The points of friction are numerous. Today, a new dynamic is taking shape between Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and Federal Prime Minister Mark Carney. While Smith insists she wants Alberta to remain within Canada, she continues to make demands and take actions that reignite tensions and breathe new life into separatist aspirations. This report explores the signals she's sending, the strategy behind her demands to Ottawa, and the growing strength of the sovereignty movement within her own political base. When Danielle Smith addresses Albertans, she carefully manages her image. Always flanked by Alberta flags, she also makes a point of prominently displaying the Canadian flag. This visual detail is no coincidence. The Premier asserts that she wants to preserve the unity of the country, despite ongoing tensions with Ottawa. She repeatedly says that her goal is not to grow the separatist movement, but rather to contain it. In her view, acknowledging the existence of separatist sentiment in Alberta is not the same as encouraging it. She sees it as her mission to channel that sentiment and prevent it from gaining momentum. Yet this position raises doubts, even among some neutral observers. Since coming to power, Smith has sent mixed signals. Her government recently made it easier to trigger a future referendum on Alberta's independence by lowering the threshold required for a citizen petition to initiate the process. She claims it's merely a democratic mechanism, but in a climate of distrust toward Ottawa, this move is seen differently. With discontent brewing in several parts of the West, Danielle Smith must constantly navigate a fine line between provincial assertiveness and Canadian loyalty. It's not a balancing act without consequences. During her first meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney, Danielle Smith presented a series of demands she described as crucial to avoiding a national unity crisis. She insisted that these demands be addressed within the first 6 months of the federal mandate. Among them were unrestricted access to oil and gas corridors heading north, east, and west, the repeal of Bill C-69, the lifting of the oil tanker moratorium off the coast of British Columbia, the elimination of the cap on oil and gas emissions, and the transfer of oversight over the industrial carbon tax to the provinces. Smith also voiced her opposition to any tax or restriction on Alberta's oil and gas exports to the United States, declaring that the province would no longer tolerate subsidizing other large provinces capable of funding themselves. She criticized federal environmental policies, calling them a threat to Alberta's economy, and warned that Ottawa's refusal to meet these demands could further escalate regional tensions. Political analysts note that while these demands reflect the concerns of many Albertans, they are perceived as maximalist positions, making a full federal response difficult. This strategy could allow Smith to claim victories even in the case of partial concessions, while maintaining pressure on the federal government. However, the approach carries risks. The possibility of a referendum on Alberta's separation in 2026 is becoming increasingly tangible. Smith recently introduced legislation lowering the threshold required to trigger such a vote. Now, a petition supported by 10% of registered voters in the last provincial election, around 400,000 signatures, would suffice. Although the Premier insists she does not support secession, she maintains that Albertans have the right to decide their own future in response to federal policies seen as harmful to the province's economy, particularly in the oil and gas sectors. This initiative comes amid rising discontent with Ottawa. Federal environmental policies deemed restrictive and trade tensions with the United States have fueled a sense of alienation. Recent protests in Edmonton have drawn supporters of separation, with some even suggesting Alberta join the American Federation. In response, Smith has launched the Alberta Next initiative, which includes public town halls and the formation of a negotiating team to discuss the province's future. She hopes to secure meaningful changes to federal policies. However, the prospect of separation remains uncertain. The Federal Clarity Act stipulates that a province cannot secede without a clear majority vote and parliamentary approval. Moreover, although support for separation has grown, a majority of Albertans still prefer to remain within Canada. Failing to meet the province's high expectations could deepen existing divisions. The prospect of a referendum on Alberta's separation in 2026 raises critical questions about national unity and the future of Canadian federalism. Although Premier Danielle Smith states she does not support secession, she has introduced legislation allowing such a vote if a petition gathers signatures from 10% of registered voters. This initiative reflects the ongoing tensions between Alberta and the federal government, particularly regarding energy and environmental policies. Growing dissatisfaction within the province, fueled by perceptions of economic unfairness and federal neglect, is driving the debate on provincial autonomy. As Canada celebrates its democratic institutions, the situation in Alberta underscores the importance of constructive dialogue to address regional concerns and preserve national integrity.